Joining us tonight, we welcome back Carla Robbins, Deputy Editorial Page Editor of the New York Times, and Gideon Rose, Managing Editor of Foreign Affairs magazine. All right, Gideon, let me start with you. Let's start with Afghanistan. We're on the way now to perhaps the deadliest month for coalition forces. Is it just the simple fact that we've boosted the number of troops, thereby we should expect more casualties as a result?
Well, it's not just the number of troops, it's also the rules of engagement and the strategy that they're using. If you could have a lot of troops there, and if they're not doing anything, if they're hunkered down in bases or bombing from 30,000 feet, you're not going to have many casualties, at least of ours. So it's partly a function of the new strategy as well as the new number of troops.
But which is to get the troops out there.
Which is to get the troops out there. And frankly, it's not just our casualties that are important, it's the local casualties. And one of the reasons we are engaging in a more direct way with the war and fighting it in a more hands-on way is precisely so we can reduce local civilian Afghan casualties and therefore make the war effort more sustainable and get the population on our side.
Well, what about the partners in this effort? Great Britain suffered, I think it was 8 casualties in the span of 24 hours. You had that very dramatic scene of the hearses going through towns. How long can they sustain that in public opinion?
Well, I think the Brits are pretty dowdy. I mean, the Brits are tough, and certainly there's been a great deal of resistance to Iraq after a while, and they did finally do that. But I think I think the Brits are committed. I think the frustrating thing, of course, is that the rest of NATO is not committed to it. You do have other troops there in less dangerous places because the rules of engagement are so, let's not take casualties, let's not kill anyone. Raises very big questions about the alliance in the long run. Now, does the United States have enough troops to do what it needs to do, and does President Obama have the will to put in a lot more troops, is also a question here domestically. And
what do you think the answer to that is, Gideon?
Well, I think the real question is about whether the strategy is going to be working and showing results. My reading of history and of the social science literature on this is that people can accept casualties when they think something is getting done. And they get very upset, not just with absolute numbers of casualties, but with casualties that seem to be expended for no good reason. So the real question will be not just is there a higher uptick of casualties, but of whether we're actually making progress. Is the situation stabilizing? And we don't quite know that yet, but we'll see in a few months.
Although if there is perceived progress in Iraq, I think that people will be more tolerant of what's going on in Afghanistan. People will remember how bad things were in Iraq and be perhaps more tolerant. And also I think there's the feeling that because Afghanistan's against Taliban and Al-Qaeda, that this is the good war, the right war. So I think that there's also that tolerance for that, at least for a while.
All right, let's move on to the issue of human rights. We had the murder of Natalia Estemirova. She was a staunch supporter of human rights. She had reported on events in Chechnya. Russia says that there's going to be a deep investigation, that they will find somebody here. Are we really supposed to believe Russia when they say this?
No.
Anything more you wish to add?
No, I mean, it's hard. It's horrible. It's horrible for investigators. It's horrible for journalists. It's just a terrible, terrible thing. And this government in Russia, they're just knocking off journalists and human rights people and lawyers, right and left. It's just a terrible thing.
So what should the Obama administration do?
Well, it's very interesting because the New York Times had an editorial on this very morning, and even they didn't suggest that the Obama administration do something different about the subject.
Gideon, you're reading.
The fact is that this is a tragedy. And there are a lot of human rights abuses in Chechnya. There have been for many years now, of course. And there isn't that much that the United States can, or frankly, in my opinion, sort of should do on an actual policy level. The difference between Obama and Bush on this is that Bush basically talked a bigger game but didn't do anything. The Obama administration has even dropped the talk. They're very fastidious about what they will do themselves, but they won't lift a hand for somebody else. So we won't torture now, but we'll happily shake the hand of people who do torture.
Well, I think that's a little extreme. I think, as we mentioned when we were here on the anniversary of Tiananmen, I mean, that the administration did have quite a strong statement that it came out. It is a challenge to balance the fact there's an enormous number of things they want to get done with the Russians. It's a corrupt and awful government there, repressive government there, and how you do this, every administration has this problem, how you do this balance. I don't think that they won't lift a hand to comply. I think it's a little harsh.
I don't think it's harsh at all, and I think I'm not saying they're wrong in doing that way. You mentioned Tiananmen. UN? Well, we just had some kind of a replay in Iran, and what did the administration do? Stayed on the sidelines, stayed out of it, and waited to see who would win so that they could basically deal with whoever won. That's a good thing. That was the right thing to do.
I don't think that's what happened in
Iran.
Iran.
But it's very cold.
I
This
think
is a cold, these people have ice in their veins, and that's what you need to run a successful foreign policy.
I'm not trying to defend them, but I will say that in Iran, they made a very clear decision, as they have made as arcane as it may sound in Honduras as well. They didn't want to become the story. They didn't want to give Ahmadinejad an excuse. So I think generally when it comes to China and Russia, they have downgraded human rights in talking about it. I think Iran is a completely different game, and I think they did exactly right in Iran because they didn't make it about the United States. They made it about the opposition.
All right, we're almost out of time. Down a minute and a half. I want to bring in Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She's begun her trip now to India. She's arrived. She made what was described as a major foreign policy speech this week. Gideon, was it?
You could sum it up as saying that the Obama administration compared to Bush, as Churchill's old line, jaw is better than war. We're going to be cooperative, multilateral, new partnerships, and so forth. But really, I don't think these speeches mean anything, frankly. And I always tell foreigners they're better to watch American foreign policy like the TV with the sound turned off. Watch what we do, not what we say. You could essentially ignore this speech. It wasn't a bad speech, but you could ignore it entirely and still see American foreign policy play out, and you get a better reading of it by reading the New York Times and watching the events as they flow out.
A lot of the pundits were focusing more on not what she said, but where has she been?
Well, I mean, that's a wonderful parlor game. I mean, who's up, who's down? Is Hillary the Obama rival? Is she a powerful, not a powerful Secretary of State? She's been very low-key. There's no question about it, and she has some very, very high-profile envoys there. But I think it's a very self-confident woman who chooses Richard Holbrooke to run Afghanistan or Pakistan. And we will only know with time, once the discipline comes down, how many strong positions that she's taking behind the scenes. My money's on Hillary.
We have no idea what's actually going on behind the scenes, and the number of high-profile speeches are not a reflection of actual influence on policy.
Got to end it. Carla Robbins, Gideon Rose, thank you both.